All right, last bit of new information, section 13.4. And we had taken a look at Ann and Andy, and we're going to finish up looking with them today. They were buying this house, and we'd gone through a few of the calculations. We found out how much of down payment they need. We found out what their payment would be per month. And then we actually looked at the first two lines of their amortization schedule, and we talked about the fact that if they were really receiving one of these, it'd be 240 lines long, and everybody said, thank you, Dr. Hands, for not making me do a 240-line amortization schedule, right? Something like that, yes. But the process would be the same, and in reality, if you were doing something like this, of course, technology would do it for you, like an Excel spreadsheet or something like that, okay? But this is the process. This is the formulas that you would put into the cells inside of Excel to make it do it. All right, so I want to talk about a couple other things, though. So one of the issues, what happens, and this will happen if you go out to, I know that one of the sites that we've looked at whenever we looked at homes was Realtor.com. And Realtor.com has this little feature where you can click on the button and it tells you that regular monthly payment that you can make. And part of that is a little bit misleading because it's like Ann and Andy's situation. This told them that they were going to pay $592 a month. I mean, that's what it looks like. That's what they would have been told had they run these numbers through a search engine inside of something like Realtor.com. The problem is that's not the only things that cost when you have a home. Some of the things that cost when you have a home just cost because, they cost. I mean, right, like you've got to still have money to have food on the table. I mean, that didn't change because you had a home. But some things do change. So there's three different things that happen when you have a home that you've owned as opposed to renting that you have to take into account when you make these sort of calculations in your head and ask yourself, do I really have enough money to do this? Is this really what I want to do at this point in my life? One of them is property taxes. So you do have to pay tax on having a property, and this is not like sales tax, right? There's no sales tax on the home. There's a property tax, which means as long as you have this property, whether you owe money on it or not, you're paying some tax to the government. Specifically, it's your local city that you're in to that city. So my taxes, I live in New Walla, and my taxes will actually go to McLeod schools because that's a school district that I live in. So part of it goes towards that. Part of it will go towards the roads, go to the post office, go to the things around New Walla, okay, where I live. So if you live in Shawnee, same thing. They're going to go towards everything in Shawnee. So property tax will be different depending on the city you live in. It's actually not necessarily only based on the state. It's partly based on the city as well. Now, it does also have to do with the state. I'll tell you that when we went from Oklahoma and we lived in Ohio, our property taxes were almost twice as expensive in Ohio. And Ohio property taxes are higher. Other people's property taxes are lower. So property tax is one of those. Homeowners insurance is another one. Now, let me make one comment about renting. You are very wise if you're renting to have renter's insurance, which is next to nothing anyway. The very first time when I moved out, we were about to get married, my husband and I, and we had an apartment. I had the apartment, not we yet. I had the apartment, and we got renter's insurance. And I will tell you, we bundled the renter's insurance with our car insurance, and it cost less money to have both than to just have the car insurance. Renter's insurance is dirt cheap, and because you got this discount for having two policies, it actually made it cheaper to have two policies with that particular company than just to have our car insurance with them. Renter's insurance pays for your personal items in that home or apartment or whatever if something were to happen. So, for example, if you're renting an apartment catches on fire, total loss, you get nothing out of it. Nobody's giving you any money if you did not have that insurance to start with. Okay, the insurance that the property managers, the property owners have on that property is for the building only. It is not for your personal items. Okay, so that's my plug for renter's insurance. It's really, really smart. We have a gal at our church who was living in a home and had no renter's insurance, and it was one that was destroyed by the fires that you've had. The fire. Ethan's not here today, but he's a firefighter, volunteer firefighter, and there were fires that swept through a lot in the last year-ish or so through Oklahoma and different parts of Oklahoma. She was one of those homes. She was able to rescue a few things out of the home. The total loss, there was no insurance on her things. She lost everything. It's not a good plan, okay? Homeowners insurance, however, doesn't just cover your actual home. I know that sounds kind of funny, but there's other things that it covers besides just the effects inside of your home, that is all of your personal property. It's going to cover the building and all of your other structures. So, for instance, if you have a fence and the fence is torn down in a tornado, it covers the fence. You have a shed out back, it covers the shed. Okay, so it covers those things. And those are all important things. Like, those are the things I think about when I think about insurance. But that's actually not the big thing that insurance will cover. Homeowners insurance actually covers liability too. So for instance, you've got Junior, he's your son, and he has his playmate from down the street that comes over, and something happens because probably Junior's friend was not behaving well, and your dog bites him. These things happen, right? Well, the issue is that you're responsible as the homeowner for the fact that your dog bit that kid. You're responsible to pay for all of his medical bills. As long as you have a good relationship with the family, that might not be a big deal. The problem is, what happens if that family sees an opportunity to make a little bit of money and they decide to sue you? Well,
it does provide liability coverage.
Right, so your homeowner's insurance provides the liability coverage if something were to happen to someone on your property. And not just dog bites, but anything. So if somebody trips and falls walking into your home, anything where somebody might be able to be hurt on your property, also that's covered underneath your homeowner's insurance. So it's a really important thing. And the reason that I say that that's more important is because, so the tornado comes, destroys your entire home, and your home was worth $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. That's a big amount of money. But Junior's parents, depending on the kind of people that they are, they may be suing you for millions of dollars, right? The liability thing's a really big deal. Okay, the last thing is maintenance. Now, you have some maintenance fees yourself when you rent, depending on what you own in your home, right? So thinking about Ann and Andy, if they rented a place that didn't come with a refrigerator, like in their situation, the refrigerator died, they're still responsible. But a lot of your property inside, a lot of the appliances and things inside of a rental property are actually owned by the people who own your property. And you're not responsible for those. So the dishwasher goes out, the maintenance guy comes, and they fix the dishwasher, and you're not out any money as the renter. But when you're the homeowner, you are. So you have to consider the maintenance issues, and part of that is the reason why people look at the age of a home. It's not just a matter of the different things that cost, because you have to look at the roof. How long is that roof going to last? That kind of stuff. So there's maintenance issues to take into consideration as well. All right, so what I want to look at on the next slide is the total amount of monthly payment for Ann and Andy, considering a couple of things. So this one we knew their total mortgage and interest, right? The interest, the total payment, the mortgage amount was $592 and some change. This actual question asks us to find the monthly payment for Ann and Andy if their annual taxes are $932 and their annual insurance is $660.
I think if you divide this by 12.
Good. So why would we want to divide by 12, Leah?
Because this one is annual.
Exactly. So the fact that they're giving these an annual, and the reason I'm giving them to you in that way is because not only does your book do it, but because that's the way they really come when they come in the mail to you from the county assessor, the people who charge you your taxes, or from Allstate, if that's who your insurance company is. They tell you the total amount like that this is what they do, okay? So if you take a look at this, we've got our original monthly payment, which was $592, what was it?
$592.89.
89 cents, okay, 89. And we need 1/12 of each of these because we want to know the amount we're paying per month for each of these. So we want $932 over 12, which we're going to calculate directly in a moment, and we want the $660 over 12. All right, so I'm going to keep my $592 at the moment. What is $932 divided by 12?
It's $77.67 for 66666.
So we're going to round to 67. Okay, did you get that too, Tara? Is that the value you pulled up? You're still working. That's okay. Alyssa's typing. Is that what you have, Alyssa? Okay, great. All right, so we've got two people who said it. That doesn't always mean things are right, but I feel good about that. So we're going to go with it. How about the 660? Someone else who didn't talk on that one for me. Do the 660. Carrie, you have a calculator. What's 660 over 12?
55.
55. That one was a nice whole number, right? Okay, Holly, you have 55 on that too? Awesome. All right, we're going to add these three values together, and we're going to figure out then what our actual monthly expense is.
$60. 55 times 12 is $660.
Good. All right, so what is the summation? Leah, what is the summation of all these things now?
Let's add someone else.
That sounds good. Okay. Perfect. So it's not really costing them about $600 a month. Really, it's costing them a little over $7, right? Now, let me make one comment here. There's actually a couple things you can do from a practical standpoint. One thing is called an escrow account. You can have the bank manage for you all the interest and the taxes, the insurance, and the taxes. So when you pay your monthly payment to the bank, this $725 is actually what you pay, and then they take responsibility for paying the taxes when taxes are due, paying the insurance when insurance is due. You can do it that way. Or you can retain the ability to do that yourself. The difference is that if you decide to do this through the bank, they collect a certain amount of it from you up front, and they keep an account that has enough in it to pay when that expense comes up. Whereas if you do it yourself, and you're able to do it yourself by being careful, you can keep that account that they were sort of holding with not giving you any interest for the amount of money. So, for example, if you wanted to do this yourself and you were disciplined enough, you could put into a savings account the $77, $67, and the $55 every month, and you could just keep adding to it every month. You get your paycheck, you stick that money aside, and then when the insurance comes up, you pay the insurance. Make sense? You could do that, right? So that's one way to handle the situation, okay? The other way is to do it through escrow. Yes, Trent?
Does the bank charge for an escrow account?
They don't charge for the account because you're going to have an escrow account anyway for the mortgage and you're going to have that part of it anyway. This is just one way of putting this into the escrow account. Good question. But they also don't give you any interest on your money, right? So I'll tell you, the first 3 homes we bought, we did this. We stuck it all in the escrow account until the last home we bought, and I realized exactly how it worked because I never asked the right questions to know. I just didn't ask, and I didn't understand. And so once I found out all they're doing is they're holding my money and not giving me any interest on that money during this time frame, I said, I think I can do that myself. And so we don't have ours escrowed any longer. But I'll tell you, the first time when my sister-in-law did it, I thought she was crazy because I didn't understand what she was doing. So one of the things, let me just pause and say this in the moment here, is what I hope this whole chapter does for you is it causes you to ask questions. So that when it does come time for you to purchase a home or to do this or to do that, if you have something staring at you, like I had a student in my other class ask me some questions about financing a car, that you ask the right questions. Because that's what I know I didn't do. I didn't ask the right questions. I didn't understand what I was doing exactly, and nobody was forthcoming with information. Nobody just came out and said, hey, consider this. And so I just thought I knew what I was doing, and I made a lot of mistakes. I hope that you will ask the right questions to the people in your life that you trust to be able to give you good advice on how to make those kind of decisions. All right, let's take a look at another component here. Some financial advisors recommend not paying your home off early because you lose a tax write-off, i.e. you'll have to pay more money in taxes. And this is going a little bit outside of what you've seen before probably, and I want to talk a little bit about this. But let's consider if this is good advice within the context of Ann and Andy's situation. Ann and Andy's loan is a $100,000 loan at 3.75%. So the first thing we're going to do right here is we're going to consider how much would Ann and Andy pay in interest the first year of the loan. And this is an approximate because I'm not doing the amortization process, okay? I'm just going to consider we've got 1 month or 1 year of interest. This is not going to be exact, but we're ballparking it here to try to answer this question of whether this financial advisor is correct, okay? So Ann and Andy have a $100,000 loan. How can we figure out how much interest they would pay approximately in a year? Yeah, the interest formula, I equal PRT, right? All right, so what is P? That's my 100,000. What's my rate? 0.0375, right? Yeah, and then the time, we're doing it for 1 year for now, okay? All right, so let's take 100,000, take my interest rate, my 1 year, and multiply out and see about, and this is approximate because as we found out with that amortization schedule, what really happens is we pay a little bit less interest every month. But it amounted to about $1. So we're not far off by doing this. How much money are we paying approximately in our interest?
Make it exactly.
Well, it'll be the exact for this calculation.
$3,750.
$3,750. So $3,750 is the exact calculation here, which is approximating my question, how much interest the first year. So the first year, they give the bank $3,750 basically in rent, right, for the ability to live in that home, and then the rest of the money they pay toward the home went towards their principal. Everybody good with that so far? Haven't dealt with any of the tax implications. All right, so what happens when you do your taxes then, if you itemize, and most people are able to itemize once they own a home. If you itemize on your taxes, you're able to take the amount of money that you contribute towards certain things off of your taxable income. So if you make $25,000, you're going to not have to pay $25,000. You're not going to have to pay on $25,000 of tax. You'd pay on $3,750 less than that. You take that off of your taxable income, and you won't have to pay taxes on $3,750 because that was for your interest on your home. Okay, you can do it for charitable giving too. The amount of money you give towards your church also comes straight off of how much money, not how much money you pay in taxes, but how much money the government considers you making in the year. Okay, so that's what we're looking at here. Thus, the amount of income that Ann and Andy will pay in taxes will be decreased by this amount. Okay, Ann and Andy are in a 25% tax bracket. Now, there's nothing specific about the 25%. I just chose one and we're going to use it. Any number you put in here is going to still make all this work out just fine. We're just going to go 25% to see how this works. So the question is, Ann and Andy have this tax bracket. How much will this decrease in income, quote unquote, save them in taxes? Well, they would have paid a portion of their money towards taxes. That $3,750, 25% of that would have gone towards taxes had they not had this home. So the 25% of that is not going toward taxes, they just don't have to pay in taxes now. So they get sort of like a tax break. I mean, that's what they do. They get a tax break for this. They get a tax break of 25%, and it's 25% of the loan's interest. Not of the loan, but of the interest. So we can actually talk about them saving the amount of their interest, which was $3,750, times their tax bracket, because they are not going to pay 25% of this money. Don't have to pay it. This is how much they save. So how much is this?
That. Let's ask someone else here.
137. Sorry.
Not 100. What was it? It's going to be 1,000. 900. What did you say? 900? Okay, I'm sorry. I heard 100 and I was like, that's too small. 937?
And 50 cents.
And 50 cents? Okay. Does that look okay to everyone? Now, if you have to have a mortgage because you can't pay off the home, or I'm all about not sending the government that extra $1,000. Don't get me wrong. Okay, right? I would like to keep it if I can. That's great. But here's what some financial advisors would tell you is that even if you could pay off your home early, you shouldn't. Because as long as you keep this, you're not having to pay that extra $1,000 in your taxes. Here's the problem with that reasoning. If Ann and Andy are in a position where they could pay off their home and chose not to, what they're essentially saying is that they are going to pay the credit union $3,750 in order to keep from sending the government $937.50. If they're able to pay off the mortgage quicker, does it make sense to keep the house loan for that purpose? No. Right? I don't want to send $3,000, almost $4,000 to my credit union just so I avoid sending $1,000 to the government. That doesn't make financial sense. But this is one of the prevalent things that people say all the time is you should keep your mortgage. You should keep your mortgage because you get this tax write-off. And financially, looking at numbers, it just doesn't work out that way. Okay? All right. I want to show you a couple other things. Escrow we've talked about already a little bit. This is just a reserve account maintained by the mortgage lender. Taxes and insurance can be collected up front from the borrower, paid into the account, and then the lender pays those agencies. We've already actually gone through that. The last thing we're going to do is I want to talk to you about another kind of mortgage. And the other kind of mortgage that this is going to talk about is an adjustable rate mortgage. Sometimes you'll hear it called an ARM, A-R-M. Or variable rate mortgage, it's a VRM. Okay, ARM is a little bit more of a common acronym. What these do is they do not have a fixed rate over time. Usually what happens is they start out at a lower rate and they have the ability to become a higher rate later. Okay? So if you were to see something right now and somebody was offering you 2.5% or 2% on a loan, that'd be for a home, that'd be an ARM. Because rates are not that low, not fixed rates. Fixed rates are much, well, and I'm not even sure exactly what they are right now because there hasn't been a lot of talk about that in media lately. But we're looking at somewhere probably around 3 to 4% is the actual fixed rate numbers. All right, so you might say, well, why don't I just get that variable rate and get that lower percentage rate? Because that sounds pretty good. Well, let's take a look at some of the things that can happen. There are some quantities governing ARMs. First, there's an adjustment period. That's the time between adjustments. So you're going to have a certain rate on an ARM for a certain length of time. So it might be you get 2%, but you get 2% only for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. Okay, you only get it for a certain time, and then at the end of that time frame, the mortgage company gets to decide if they're going to raise the amount or not. That's what happens. Okay? So that's one of the problems, right, is that you only get that rate for a certain length of time, and then it has the possibility of increasing. Now, there are some things that govern how much it can increase. The index is the standard fluctuating average. It's the basis of the new adjusted rate. So if they were to decide to raise your rate, it would probably be because rates went up. Fixed rates went up too. So if everything were to stay steady and the same for the next 10 years, your variable rate probably would do you well because it would probably stay put too. But if your variable rate you get in on is a 2% and over the next 5 years, regular, normal, fixed rates go up, then at the point when your variable rate is set to go up, you're going to go up too. So instead of those fixed rate people that got in at 3.5% or 3.75 like Ann and Andy, your 2% is now going to end up costing you more than their 3.25 or whatever. Okay? Margin is the additional amount added to the index by the lender. That is how much they're allowed to make it go up. The discount is the amount by which the initial rate may be less than the index. So if the index is currently 3.5 and they're offering you a percentage of 2%, the index you would be saving, the discounted amount would be a 1.5 rate. Okay? The interest rate cap is the cap, the limit on how much they're going to increase your rate. So they might say something like, you're going to start at 2%, the most we would ever raise it to is 7%, 5% more, something like that. There's a cap on this. So they do have a maximum amount. They can't just come back at you and say, we're going to charge you 50% now. They can't do that. I mean, there is some limit to what they can do. Periodic cap is the limit on rate increases per adjustment period, typically about 1% per 6 months or 2% per year. So if you have one of these loans where they're going to reconfigure it in 3 years, and you're looking at this, the most that they would be able to go up would be something like 2% per year. Okay? So they're looking at there. The overall cap is the total limit that they're allowed to raise raise the interest rate on the life of the loan. Can't talk today, sorry. So typically about 5%, so that 2% has the ability to turn into 7%. And we did a figure on a 7% something last time. Do you guys remember? That interest was a huge difference in interest when we did a 7% interest rate. So that's a big jump. The payment cap is the limit on how much the payments can increase in each adjustment. Where are we now? Negative amortization is an increasing loan principal. Now I want to talk about that just a little bit because there are some loans where the amounts, when we were doing that amortization schedule, if the interest rates are high enough, that is if they jump up and your payments are such that what happens is actually the amount that you owe back on that particular product, in this case we're talking about loans for a home, the amount you owe back on the home is actually more than it was the amount before. It can actually increase how much you owe on the amount of the loan because the interest was more than the payments were fixed at. I have a friend in Ohio that happened to them. They got into a loan where they were actually only paying, they weren't paying enough on the loan to actually cover the interest that was accruing every month. And so they lived there 3 or 4 years, which they got an adjustable rate because they thought they wouldn't live there for more than 3 or 4 years. That wasn't in the cards. Her husband was going to be transferred. No reason to get a fixed rate mortgage. We're only going to be here a few years. They've been there quite a few years now, and they've got this problem where this interest has increased and their monthly payments are different, and they actually owe more on the home than they did when they purchased it. And that's a really bad thing if the price of the home drops, which is what's happened in the last, 7, 8 years. We've seen how, and they've recovered some. I don't want to just be all gloom and doomy because I'm not, but they did. I mean, when the prices of the houses dropped, people had this housing crisis. You guys were aware of this, at least to some extent, because it was all over the media with election stuff. Housing crisis. People can't get into homes. We've got all these problems and stuff. And it was due in part to these loans that were made, variable rate mortgage loans, these ARMs that were made to people who probably didn't have any business paying this amount of money. And so what happened is when their payments increased from $500 a month to $800 a month, and then the father lost the job, I can't make my mortgage payment. This is a problem. We've got hit in two directions because the economy was doing both of these things, right? Got hit in two directions. Now what? And now we can't even sell the home because it's not even worth what we paid for it. And so we end up with people doing foreclosures and short sales and things like this. So all of these things compounded is what created this issue, but variable rate mortgages are one of the problems in that. Convertible features, there are some loans that you will have the ability, if you start out variable, to convert it into a fixed rate mortgage at some point. That's a convertible feature, not like a convertible car. And then there's also some of these that have prepayment penalties. Now, every time we've talked so far about paying something off early, we've saved money, and that's been a really good thing. So what you want to make sure, above all else maybe, is that there's no clause inside of what you're signing that says if I pay it off early, I get penalized. Because, man, would that be a bummer, wouldn't it? Yeah, that's no good. And so, then you're stuck with, well, do I pay it off early and take the penalty, or do I keep paying this interest? And we got to make all these calculations and decisions, and just make sure that you don't have a loan that has a prepayment penalty. And most don't. But there are those issues sometimes. So any questions that you guys would like to ask? I wanted to present the information about the variable rate. I'm not asking you to do any homework questions on them. I wanted to present it to you because I want you to know it's there, and hopefully I've presented it in a bad enough light that you realize it really is not a good option under almost any circumstances. And it's a really scary thing because it has this ability to change a lot of things as the loan goes on. But any questions you have about this? You're not going to do any questions specifically, but yes.
Is that where you're going from? Say you have going to a fixed rate.
Sometimes people will refinance. They'll go from a variable rate to a fixed rate, which is a really good move if they can refinance to do that. Some people also go on a fixed rate. What they'll do is on a refinance, they'll go from a higher interest rate to a lower interest rate. For example, when we moved here, we finalized all the purchasing of our house in February of 2011. And by the summer of 2012, just a little bit more than a year later, interest rates had dropped another whole percent. Usually interest rates have to drop at least a whole percent before it makes sense to refinance because there are costs associated with refinancing. Remember those closing costs? They come back up when you refinance. And so you have to weigh how much your interest you're saving compared to how much closing costs are costing you. And it usually takes at least a whole percent before it makes sense to do so. But you'll see a lot of people refinancing lately, not because they want a smaller amount, not because they want a shorter term or a longer term, none of those. It's because that interest rate differential was enough different that they were going to actually save a lot of money in interest to do so. Any other questions? All right.